The market fixates on sentiment weighed down by US-Iran strike risk. This is a fundamental miscalculation of the primary threat vector. A kinetic exchange is not the strategic liability. Its cost is prohibitive and its outcome uncertain. The mathematical certainty of asymmetric escalation dictates a different path. The real vector is not loud, it is silent. The objective is not physical destruction, but systemic paralysis, targeting the central nervous system of US financial and military power. The weapons are not missiles. They are cable-cutting submersibles and satellite-blinding lasers. Severing these connections triggers a solvency crisis, not of debt, but of data. The entire architecture of swift military command and market liquidity depends on these vulnerable undersea arteries. This protocol is designed to create a blind Leviathan, a nation-state possessing overwhelming kinetic force, but its sensory and command network has been surgically removed. It is deaf, blind, and operating on a compromised launch-on-warning protocol. Immensely powerful, but thrashing in the dark. Hey. Conflict is not initiated from a position of strength. It is a mathematical function of a state facing a solvency crisis. When the cost of maintaining internal stability exceeds projected revenue, the regime must either collapse or externalize the crisis. This is not a war of choice. It is a violent form of bankruptcy protection. The blueprint was telegraphed. According to analysis from RUSI, the kinetic action in Eastern Europe was triggered when the long-term cost of an unpopular war became a smaller domestic liability than the immediate risk of internal political fragmentation. The conflict became a strategic asset acquisition, a forced restructuring to prevent a systemic default of the entire state apparatus. This vector of internal decay is now accelerating inside China. The purge of General Zhang Yuxia, President Xi's closest military ally, is not a demonstration of control. It is a symptom of terminal corrosion within the command structure. Reports indicate the investigation is for taking bribes and, critically, leaking nuclear weapons secrets to the United States. This exposes the core vulnerability. A regime facing a solvency crisis, whose own military leadership is compromised, cannot risk a symmetric, conventional war. The kinetic cost is unmanageable, and command integrity is zero. The logical and only strategic pivot is to asymmetry. Weakness forces the hand. When you cannot trust your generals to execute a complex conventional campaign, you are forced to rely on systems that remove human discretion. This means a lower threshold for escalation and a reliance on launch-on-warning protocols. The ultimate risk is not a confident adversary, but a decaying one, compensating for its own internal rot with an automated asymmetric trigger. The central vulnerability is not military, it is economic. The kinetic cost structure has been inverted. According to analysis from institutions like the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the numbers present a solvency crisis on the modern battlefield. A state-of-the-art main battle tank, a $5 million asset, can now be neutralized by a $500 commercial drone modified for a kinetic strike. This is not a balanced equation. It is an economic execution. This 10,000 to 1 cost disparity is the engine of asymmetric escalation. It's what analysts term the democratization of violence, the systemic diffusion of lethal capability from the superpower to the subnational level. An adversary no longer needs industrial parity to inflict strategic damage. They simply need to exploit the massive liability of our expensive legacy platforms. Every deployed tank becomes a high-value target for a low-cost threat, turning our strength into a systemic weakness. Kinetic conflict does not occur in a vacuum. It requires a staging ground, a laboratory for testing escalation protocols at a low kinetic cost. These are the gray zones. According to CSIS analysis, these are nations suffering from a systemic solvency crisis, where political paralysis creates a strategic vacuum. The collapse of a government in Lebanon is not a localized tragedy. It is the creation of a permissive battle space. These zones are selected with mathematical precision, high strategic value, low cost of entry, and plausible deniability. These gray zones function as proxy laboratories. Here, adversaries can field test new doctrines and stress test U.S. response times without committing to a direct, symmetric confrontation. Reports of U.S.-Iran strike risk are a symptom of this strategy. Each drone launch or naval standoff is a data point, calibrating the adversary's understanding of our launch-on-warning thresholds and political will. The objective is not to win the local skirmish, but to gather intelligence for the primary conflict theater. This strategy is not a choice. It is a necessity driven by economics. As outlined by analysts tracking BRICS initiatives, the development of a linked CBDC network represents a direct, systemic assault on the US dollar's global liquidity dominance. Unable to compete symmetrically in the financial domain, adversaries are forced to shift the conflict to the asymmetric kinetic domain. They leverage instability in places like South Africa, or even internal fractures in Western states like Canada, as low-cost vectors to bleed U.S. resources and attention. The terminal risk lies in the compromised integrity of the operators. Reports from the Wall Street Journal allege China's highest-ranking military general leaked nuclear secrets. This is not mere corruption. It is a catastrophic failure of command and control. When a proxy conflict in a gray zone inevitably escalates, the decision to launch will not be made by a stable, rational actor. It will be made by a compromised command structure, compensating for its own internal decay. This is the blueprint for an accidental nuclear cascade, initiated not from a position of strength, but from a state of terminal institutional rot. The launch-on-warning protocol is a relic of Cold War game theory, a mathematical necessity to guarantee a second strike. The protocol is simple. If early warning systems detect an inbound kinetic launch, you launch your retaliation before impact. The liability is not the missile, it is the data. The entire system is built on the absolute integrity of satellite and radar feeds. This creates the ultimate asymmetric vector for an adversary. A cyber attack that blinds these systems, a digital fog of war, forces a commander into a zero-sum decision. Is the signal loss a technical failure, or is it the first move in a decapitation strike? He does not have hours, he has minutes. This systemic risk is amplified by internal decay. Reports that China's top general, Zhang Yuxia, was investigated for leaking nuclear secrets illustrate a compromised command structure. In this environment of eroded trust, a commander cannot distinguish a hack from internal sabotage. He is forced by protocol to assume the worst-case scenario. The fear of being disarmed compels a launch based not on confirmation, but on the absence of information. This is the blueprint for an accidental cascade. The thesis of asymmetric escalation dictates that adversaries facing a systemic dollar liquidity crisis must substitute kinetic cost with systemic liability. They cannot afford a symmetric war. They can afford to engineer a solvency crisis. The internal decay within adversary command structures, evidenced by reports from the Russian Presidential and Information Office concerning China's General Zhang Yuxia and the alleged leaking of nuclear secrets, increases the probability of a launch-on-warning protocol for non-military assets. This is not a mistake. It is a mathematical certainty. The pressure from BRICS nations exploring CBDC linkages, as tracked by Interactive Crypto, is a direct assault on U.S. financial dominance. This economic pressure forces a strategic pivot. A direct military strike risks a unified NATO response. An act of God does not. Therefore, The next escalation vector will be disguised as a catastrophic technical failure. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, expect a systemic, attribution impossible disruption of a Tier 1 U.S. logistical and data hub. The target profile is the Port of Long Beach/Los Angeles complex, or the MAE West Internet Exchange Point. The event will manifest as a cascading power and data blackout lasting 72 to 96 hours, timed to coincide with peak shipping season or a period of acute market stress, like that observed around U.S.-Iran tensions. CSIS analysis of state-level cyber capabilities confirms the operational viability. The objective is not destruction, but calibration. It is a shot across the bow to test U.S. response protocols, measure the kinetic cost of supply chain paralysis, and signal leverage in future negotiations. It will not be classified as an act of war. It will be classified as the most expensive insurance claim in history.